Chong Li, the current champ.
He's never been defeated. Holds awesome records, including the fastest KO. He killed a guy during the last Kumite.
Yep, kicked the poor bastard right in the throat. I died right there on the platform. Chong Li stood there and watched him die.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes, and Kevin Feige, within the last 2 weeks, has kind of been in the headlines. He made a few quotes basically saying that you don't need a big comic book character or a big high-selling comic book story to create a movie nowadays. It seems like we probably already knew this, but here to talk with me about that is my good friend Doc, the XMen historian, the Marvel aficionado. How you doing, Doc?
I'm great, man. This is a topic I'm really interested in, and I love when we talk about this kind of stuff. It's great. It's kind of timeless, and it's really important.
Did you know that you could make a movie and it didn't have to be based on like a big comic book story, or you could just make original stuff and they can be successful?
Wait, you mean to tell me that the Gone with the Wind wasn't a comic book before it was a movie? Holy shit!
I think it was a novel.
But and the Titanic
source material. A lot of things, like let's say the Matrix. I believe that's an original story. You can do original stuff. You can adapt stuff. It doesn't have to be all those things. But Kevin Feige himself is in the adapting comics business. So I think he might be missing the mark, and he's been ultra successful. No one can ever take that away from Kevin Feige, Marvel Studios, the MCU. They have taken the formula that has worked in comic books, the shared comic book universe with all these things leading up to a big event. Your big event book is your Avengers movies. Even the Civil War was kind of a mini Avengers movie, and it makes them feel special, and you feel like you got to come back for more. And it's got the, what do they call it, FOMO. You can't miss out because everyone's talking about it, and they have done that extraordinarily well. You cannot take that away. But I do think Kevin Feige might be huffing his own farts a little bit and thinking that maybe the comic books themselves and the stories and even the fans that went out and bought them and made them timeless classics, like have no bearing on the success of the MCU.
I think you're right. Kevin is reading a bit of his own press here, and believing it, because look, Kevin has been very, very successful. There's no taking that away from him. You cannot at all. But the thing is, the more successful he's been, it's when he's hewed closest to the source material. I mean, you could look at something like the first Iron Man, which is still considered almost a perfect movie. Now, was it
lifted straight out of Denny O'Neil's Ironmonger Obadiah Stane story?
Exactly, and the origin was, it was a modernized, instead of using Vietnam, they used the current, relevant recent conflict in Afghanistan, which makes perfect sense. I mean, it's the same general theory. It doesn't matter exactly where it took place. And then you look at something like Guardians of the Galaxy, which everyone loves. I mean, that's a movie that it could have, the creators on it very, very easily could have gotten scared of. I mean, you got a talking raccoon and a talking tree. That
can only say one sentence.
Yeah, that can only say one sentence in different, enunciations of it. I mean,
but no one also, Doc, the creator, James Gunn, could have taken a lot of liberties and not going with an established team, maybe picked out characters from multiple different generations of the Guardians of the Galaxy. Not exactly a well-known team, well-known entity. There have been well-known runs, and Dan Abnett's is among the best known, and that was kind of like the most recent big team, and he kind of stuck with it.
I mean, outside of Yondu, who was kind of from that future 30th century, version of the Guardians, it was all stuff basically ripped right out of that Annihilation era, Abnett and Lanning. But you got a lot of producers out there that historically have been very, very scared to make a comic book movie. They get very scared of the comic book aspects of it. But we can see with box office that there's a direct correlation that the more you embrace that kind of thing, the more you embrace the craziness of comic books, the more people actually do respond to it. And they turn out in big numbers. So it's not the comic book tropes.
It's funny, Doc. I don't want to interrupt you, but I'm going to. It's back in the day, people who don't remember this before the MCU, before Blade, and some of these other big movies, you could even maybe throw Nolan into this, but a lot of people, like when a director got a hold of a comic book franchise, their sole mission was, how do I rip the comic book parts out of it? Because that'll never work on screen. Now, sometimes it worked kind of when you look at like Batman and Batman Begins, but that was a visionary filmmaker in his prime, Tim Burton. But most of the time, you got your Joel Schumacher. He was trying to make kids' toys rather than a cool Batman movie, and it just kind of fell flat. And in a lot of other times, like Steel, like you forgot what the secret to the sauce here is, the comic book aspect.
Yeah, like there was no Superman in Steel here. There was a lot of that. That's kind of a, even if you look at the original trilogy of XMen movies, they got terrified of giving them costumes and they stuck them in black biker gear.
Spandex, oh my goodness.
They even made a joke about it. What do you expect? Yellow spandex? Like, fuck you. I mean, you might as well have just said fuck you to the fans. And the thing is, the people that you're trying to appeal to as to be your evangelists. Like, I mean, Apple figured this out years ago, that you get people to love your product and then you send them out. Their unpaid marketing department, for Christ's sake. Use them. Don't alienate them. And the thing is, I feel like, you have people like Schumacher, you have people like the Dolph Lundgren Punisher movie where they refused. Yeah, David Goyer. I swear to God, David Goyer would be happy if every movie that he does is filmed with everybody wearing black at night with no lights on in the rain. That's the way he films. You could look at most of the stuff that he's involved in. He gets scared and he darkens it out. Because they're all scared of the comic book aspects. But the comic book aspects, I don't think are a problem. They feel like, I don't know if Hollywood looks at it and says, well, people don't like, there's not as many people that read comics as go to the movies. Therefore, the comic book tropes that are in the comics, that's the problem. And it's not just an issue of medium. Because I think that you can look at box offices and see that the difference between appeal of story-wise between comic and film is merely medium. That's it. Same stuff.
If you deviate too much, and I think a good example, the new Spider-Man movies are doing very well that are the MCU. They've deviated. We've never even heard them really talk about Uncle Ben, like the origin of the character, a lot of his motivations. They changed a lot of things about Spider-Man. He seems to be Iron Lad. We've heard that joke now and then. You would have thought Spider-Man would have been maybe the best grossing, like solo hero film in the MCU. It's not.
It should be. That's the thing. Iron Man. While they played up. I mean, Robert Downey Jr. was Iron Man. He played that character. He was Tony Stark. The only thing they did was play up some of his snarkiness and pop culture references. But otherwise, he was still an egotistical playboy that, they basically got a alcoholic, pill-popping, womanizing millionaire to play an alcoholic, womanizing, pill-popping billionaire. So, hey, go be yourself with more money. That's awesome. But, they made it work. They kept the things that made the characters themselves. He looked like Tony Stark, except for he had a goatee instead of the mustache. He acted like Tony Stark. He built like Tony Stark. And as a result, you had Iron Man 3 make over $1 billion. But I don't think have either of this. I think the second Spider-Man, Far From Home, I think that one broke $1 billion, but I don't think Homecoming did. And Homecoming, Spider-Man, if you look at the comics, he's still the highest, one of the high. He's up there with Batman and Superman. He's up there actually with just Batman at this point.
Just Batman right now, yeah.
For the comics, a couple of years ago, his merchandising was selling more than every other character combined. Like Batman and Superman combined didn't sell as much as Spider-Man. So he's up there. He is in that elite class. And you would think that a movie with him, as long as it hews close to the story, is going to easily blow past $1 billion. And they've had trouble with it. Because
they didn't really go to any of the classic, Lizard is a classic, it's not Lizard. What was the first one was
the Vulture.
The Vulture.
But even
edition of the Vulture, by the way, Michael Keaton's amazing. But they didn't go with the classic Green Goblin and some of these other Death of Gwen Stacy kind of stories that are really have stood the test of time and everything. So I mean, they're still good. They're still very profitable, but you would have expected it to maybe perform a little bit better.
Yeah, you would have. I mean, I kind of understand why they didn't go with like Lizard or Death of Gwen Stacy, because they just did those in the Andrew Garfield movies. So they're trying to keep away from that. But at the same time, they should have introduced Norman even in the background, build him up for later. If you want to, you can build up Kraven. You can build up, you can put these characters in the background so that you can later, I mean, that's the point of the MCU, where these characters can come in after showing up as kind of supporting characters for a while and then play a bigger role in a future movie. People are expecting that at this point. That's the point of an interconnected universe. And they could have started adapting stuff. I mean, there's so many great, you got like the death of Jean DeWolf, you have Kraven's Last Hunt, you have the Venom. Now, granted, they can't really use Venom, but you could use a lot of the stuff from the Eric Larson era with the Sinister Six type stuff. They could have built up to that. They could have, but you haven't seen them touch any classic Spidey stories at all. And I think it's harmed the character in being unique. Because he's just Iron Boy.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. And now some people will say, well, Infinity War, Endgame, those are the most successful movies, in there of all time. They're up in the top 5. They are certainly inspired by Infinity Gauntlet. They certainly deviate greatly from the source material. But at that point, that was like the culmination of the entire MCU. It was like a goodbye to a couple of main characters, and people had invested like 20 movies worth of film going.
And honestly, the first half of Infinity War was just a almost ripped from the comics adaptation of Thanos' Quest. And then the second half of that movie was it was a loose, adaptation of Infinity Gauntlet. And the second half and Infinity or Endgame was kind of a very, very loose adaptation of, they just kind of rewrote a new ending.
And they replayed the ending from the first one, but the good guys won.
Yeah, exactly. And they gave us, they did give us some of the only thing that they gave us really from the comics, from the second half of Infinity Gauntlet comic, was Steve carrying Mjolnir. Which was, it was kind of an iconic moment. And so you got, but once you're that invested, then you can start to deviate. You can kind of start writing your own stuff. You can go in your own directions. I mean, we're cool with that.
Well, we're about to see if we're cool with that, Doc. I do want to point this out. Where I live, there are no comic shops. There are not a lot of comic book readers. Obviously, there are still trailers for Eternals, trailers for Morbius, and all these new properties that are coming up, Shang-Chi. People know that I have a comic book YouTube channel. They know I read a lot of comic books. They always come up to me like, hey, what do you think of Eternals? Is that a good comic book? Should I be excited about the movie? So, it does behoove Kevin Feige, the Marvel Studios, to realize people that have read these materials are aware of them and know what stories you're going to tell are still going to be the go-to sources on whether or not people like that know them are going to be interested.
Well, this is what happens everywhere. I mean, you have, as I said before, you have evangelists, and the comic readers function as evangelists for the films. My sister-in-law does the same thing. She's always asking me, like, I remember her asking me before Guardians came out, like, a talking tree and a talking raccoon. I'm like, no, trust me, it'll be great. It's crazy and fun, and they love it. But when you start deviating too much, when you stop making it the thing we know, we can't evangelize for you anymore.
Or you start diving into the parts of
that
the
we
history
don't like
that are bad. Thor: Love and Thunder. I think there are two big tests of Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios coming up. One of them being Thor: Love and Thunder, where you're diving into Jane Foster Thor, Jane Thor. At the very beginning, what was pretty successful. It died out somewhat quickly and just kind of limped to the finish line there. But they're taking a storyline that's not completely beloved, and then they're throwing a bunch of extra stuff onto it that makes it feel like it's anything but a Thor movie.
Yeah. Honestly, I don't know why they're even doing it as a Thor movie. It should just be as Guardians of the Galaxy, but whatever. So you're now at a point where you're at a significant deviation. I mean, I look at comics as and comic films is the stories themselves. Actually, there's a direct correlation here between how close. I mean, there's like a couple of different factors. How close you adapt it, like how close you stick to your adaptation, how much of the comic tropes you throw out, how much you stick with the look of characters that you like, and how much you keep the personalities the same. When you do those, the closer you are to hitting 100% on all of those, there's a direct correlation if you look at their box office between what you get and, I mean, especially for newer starts to franchises. I was skeptical on Doctor Strange because I'm like, oh great, they're just going to do Harry Potter. But they actually managed to do it well because they adapted the spirit of the character, even if not one particular story, but it was a character that people like. And now you look at Thor: Love and Thunder, and then later we'll get to the Eternals, but Thor: Love and Thunder, you got a lot of characters in there. Some characters that people really like, some people that are kind of people are torn on, and
well, you got people looking at it and they're going, that doesn't look like a Thor movie, even if they didn't like the Dark World. And they go ask you, like, what do you think about Thor: Love and Thunder? That looks kind of strange. You're like, yeah, it looks like shit, doesn't it? It's based on a comic book that a lot of people didn't like.
Yeah.
And then the rest of it's just added on. I have no idea what they're doing.
Yeah, I feel like they're just doing like into the Thorverse. You know, that seems to be what they're doing, because I think we get Beta Ray Bill in there as well, which people are like, hey, Beta Ray Bill, awesome. Jane Thor, Thunderstrike, well, maybe. You know, all these, there's ways to do it and ways not to do it, and I think when you start really getting into the questionable areas is when people start getting, I don't know. I mean,
it's where Kevin Feige, like I said, he's huffing his own farts, he's believing his own press, and he literally thinks he's got the Midas touch. We'll see. I might be proven wrong. That movie might do $900 million. Well, would be an enormous success.
I mean, back to my point, though, and our point in general here when it comes to adapting faithfully, you can look at both attempts that Fox did at the Phoenix Saga. Both of them were giant flops because none of them actually adapted the Phoenix Saga. They just felt like 36 issues worth of build up and story could be done in a 2-hour movie with, and then you drop all the interesting parts, all the unique parts, all the interesting plot points and the character dynamics, and they just and you end up with 2 flops out of it.
The first terrible flops. Very bad flop. So we're kind of getting we're running out of time here. I do want to talk about Eternals. So this is a new team. Very few people are familiar with who these characters are. And there are even hardcore comic fans familiar with them that just don't like the Eternals. It's something that never really caught on. And so they've taken something that was an iffy property to begin with. You look at the trailer, you look at some of these pictures, and you're like, what the hell is this?
Yeah, I mean, look, if as comic fans, we need to accept one truth here, that the Eternals are nothing but the stuff that Jack Kirby left on the cutting room floor when he went over to DC and created the New Gods. And then when he came back and he needed to invent something for Marvel, he just picked them back up off the cutting room floor and recycled them.
And he did the same thing kind of with Challenger of the Unknown.
He did.
Much earlier. Yes.
Yeah. And so you have, like, it was a thing that, you know, we talked about it last week, that if people don't, you know, if you could tell that a creator is phoning it in, you know, people obviously aren't going to care. And I think anybody, when it came out, nobody could figure, you know, everybody could tell Jack was just phoning it in. And the thing is, we've had these characters for 45 years now. Nobody has ever been able to make anyone care about the Eternals. They couldn't care when Jack was there. They didn't care in the 80s whenever they started trying to stick them on all over the Avengers titles and mix them in as regular members of the Avengers. They couldn't make them care when Neil Gaiman got a full relaunch of them in the 2000s. And they just released another big series with, you know, like 75 damn variants for it, and nobody cares about that. You know, it's
I got through half an issue and I checked out. I was like, nah, I might.
Nobody cares about. I mean, so you got to find properties that people care about. You got to adapt them faithfully. You got to give it the same kind of, you can't be scared of it being a comic book. And the more you do towards 100% on that, the more successful you're going to be. I mean, looking at the trailer, the only thing I figured out is that if they put their hand on the ground, they'll irrigate your crops, and they like to make out with each other a lot. Oh, and also all of the Kirby aesthetic is gone. So
as far as you can tell, you know, it was brief, but
even their
I just found out that you could fall asleep to an Eternals trailer.
I know, and it was it like I was skeptical on this before I even started, and after watching it, I actually am less interested than I was before. I don't even care about whether or not I like it. I just don't care.
Yeah, it looks awful, and like I said, I think Kevin Feige might be feeling a little too confident in his position, and he should, because he's been ultra successful, and I think he's. There's going to be some test of whether or not he's got what it takes just to launch anything. I have a feeling he doesn't, because Thor: Love and Thunder looks like an atrocious, follow-up. It does not feel like it's in the spirit of anything Thor or really MCU related before. And Eternals don't even know what it is. Just looks bad.
Yeah. Look, Hollywood, Kevin, there's a reason why these things, I mean, people love stories no matter what the medium is. The same stories that resonate with comic book readers resonate done the exact same way with film goers. It's just an issue of medium. It's not the tropes. It's not the message. It's the medium. Some people just don't like reading comics and they would rather go to a film. Do the same story, you will make billions.
Is that okay for you?
I liked it.
All right, let's do this next one.
And no dog.
Thank goodness. It was so hard to listen to.
I know.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Killing me.
Yeah, well, I was having to do it in my living room, and
I understand. Yeah. You got to roll with the punches sometimes. But I was listening. I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with this. And, I guess it was good timing.
No, I ended up I found a long extension cord and managed to get it into my nerd room where I normally do it, and set up in here and just close the door.
Well, I do appreciate it.
You're welcome.
You ready for this next one?
Yeah, I sounded too tinny the other way anyway.
You did.
Yeah, it was echoey.
Mm-hmm. You ready?
I'm ready.